Okay, capital cost. Who can tell me what they are?
Purchases of land, buildings, and equipment are a relatively small percentage of total organizational cost.
Capital cost, relatively small percentage. All right, we think of capital cost again. Give me some examples. Land. Buildings. Equipment. Think of large purchases. Okay, what are some criteria? We'll define here in a second. But usually we're thinking, even on a small scale, something of greater than $5,000. Something that's intended to be long lasting. In the healthcare industry, we're finding that hospitals are only keeping 6 to 10% of their total cost allocated toward capital cost. And while that's a relatively small amount compared to other industries, think about what ramifications and what must be considered. How did we open this up? Why did Kentucky not decide to join in the lawsuit against the the DOJ and Humana? Think of the real estate here that Humana has acquired and owns. Okay, as we've seen more and more mergers and acquisitions and more consolidation in this industry, I have no doubt, again, looking at it from today's environment of all this M&A activity, that we're going to see more of an emphasis on capital cost. You know, only 6 to 10% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're looking at trying to marry that between two organizations and even uprooting possible buildings and abandoning buildings or abandoning cities, I think it's something that we'll definitely see more to put in there. Legislation attempts to control rising capital expenditures. All right, can you imagine that our government got concerned at one point to say that hospitals were spending too much, that they could put themselves in financial jeopardy if they went on a spending spree and allocated too much of their money toward capital costs? First, we have the National Health Planning and Resource Development Act of 1974. Who can tell me what this act states and why it's relevant to your healthcare organizations?
It compelled the hospitals to give permission from a government entity for major capital expenditures.
They had to get permission.
Slow the growth in healthcare capital cost.
All right,
Certificate of need came into play for the beds in the hospital.
Government's attempt to slow capital growth, and hospitals had to get permission from the government entity before they made major capital
Can't open up new beds unless they're approved.
expenditures. Said you had to certify the need. You had to prove that it was needed. Next, Tax Reform Act of 1986.
Lowered the tax deductibility for charitable gifts and restricted or increased the cost of acquiring capital through tax-exempt bond markets.
Okay, so what this did was lowered tax deductibility for charitable gifts and restricted or increased the cost of acquiring capital through tax-exempt bond markets. So what this was going to put some stops up, let's just see some roadblocks in order for them to participate in that bond market. Remember, we talked about how you would go out and raise capital. One item might be you go out and issue bonds. Now, the good thing about it, those bonds that you're issuing, if you're fortunate enough to get some government entity to partner with you, if you're the University of Louisville, now I don't know about now with your marriage, but let's go back to when it was just U of L Hospital being owned by a government entity. When you all issued bonds, an investor who bought your bonds got tax exempt interest. That interest that they paid would have been tax exempt to the city of Louisville and the state of Kentucky. Inside our tax code, there's a little line that says government authorities will not tax one another. It will not tax itself. Now, the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1990, moving on up to,
Move capital costs to prospective payments over a 10-year implementation period.
move capital cost over to a 10-year period. Look at those dates. Again, pushing the cost back to over 10 years, or how you're going to allocate those costs for up to 10 years. And lastly, we have the Balanced Budget Act of 1997.
Stifling effect on the access to capital, as many hospitals were forced to use funds earmarked for capital projects to subsidize operations because of reduced reimbursements from Medicare.
All right, so what happened was hospitals here had to start taking money they had earmarked and they had to start using it for operations. Now, reflecting this, downgrades. Remember, you're participating in that credit market. Somebody's going to come out and purchase a bond for you. Remember the rating agencies?
Mm-hmm.
And the rating agencies are going to assign a rating agent, or they're going to assign a rating to you based upon your solvency, based upon your profitability. How likely, I mean, they want to make sure as an investor, if someone buys it, that they're going to be receiving that interest. Now, imagine if you've got a lot of money earmarked over here and sitting in savings, that increases your likelihood that you will pay back that bond. However, if you pull all that money saved out and you start spending it toward operations, you again, think of it in your household. You cash out all your savings and spend all your money, deplete all your assets, and then walk into a bank and try to get a loan. They're probably going to look at you a little differently than if you were sitting on that golden egg and walked in there and asked for a loan. So the Balanced Budget Act, kind of put us to where we stand right here today. What do you think of this statement?
I think it does a lot of stereotyping. I mean, in all honesty.
I mean, I don't see hospitals as a risky venture. You need hospitals for your community. So,
Well, look at that time period. Starting in 1988, you started operating under a different microscope. It's risky in the sense, who was always there to bail a hospital out? The government. Now again, go back and look at that legislation that we looked at. The government was weaning itself down from dependency on supporting your hospitals. Now again, those credit agencies, again, issuing those ratings on those bonds are looking at that hospital, again, really no differently than if they were rating it for an IBM. They're applying the same measurements and the same standards, the same type of analysis that you would for a for-profit Fortune 500 company.
What's his position exactly? I don't know now. Who did he work for? I was just a government employee.
No, it says he's an investment banker.
Oh, is he? Oh, I see. Okay.
So his job would have been to work on mergers and acquisitions. His job would have been at two companies. If Humana decides that it wants to be acquired, he comes in and works with Humana and doing the financing behind those two. So he's the banker in that sense of working with mergers. All right, view hospitals, and they will not win any awards, but keep the attention of their fearful audience. All right, no longer is the sugar daddy, means they're gonna have to start bearing to pay interest on their own debt. And again, look at your organizations right now where you work, and you're working under this environment. Again, in week 1, I said, your hospitals are run like what? A corporation or any Fortune 500 company. All right, capital expenditures. We defined as purchases of land, building, and equipment used for operations. Notice the not for resale. When you purchase it, you plan on using it for an operation. That's what makes it a capital cost. What would it be if you think you intended to resell it?
Lucrative asset.
A liquidable asset or an investment. I mean, if your job, if you intended to sell it for a profit, I'm hoping you would buy it and sell it for a profit, and you would treat it as an investment. But capital expenditures, just know you intend to use it. Have a useful life for more than 1 year, and costs $5,000 or more. If you look in your book, there is a typo. So make that correction. Your book says $500.
Well, mine's a rental, so.
Yeah, I was gonna say mine's a rental too, man.
Okay.
Noted, it's noted.
Duly noted.
So $5,000 or more, and it is subject to depreciation, with the exception of land. What's the one asset that we do not depreciate?
Land.
Land. The only rare instance that you would ever depreciate land is if you were ever going to
Dump toxic waste.
destroy that land where you would lessen the worth of it for future use. So yes, if you intended to dump toxic waste on it, you would depreciate it because it's going to decline in value.
Oh, did you know that?
Okay, so capital cost,
Tell us brief.
we divide them into 2 categories, replacement and new ventures. If we're going to say it's a replacement, it's something that at the end of its useful life, it's going to be fully depreciated. We're going to use it as a way of improved productivity, improved quality, or it could be required by regulation. Now compare this to new ventures. Expanded services, improved safety conditions, reducing operating expenses, or improved patient care. Think of more services, think of expansions over here, think of growth over here. You know, yeah, we could see some efficiencies here with improved quality and productivity. But again, think of what would prompt you to replace something versus spend new money on acquiring something. That's what we're talking about here. Okay, let's look at this case study. Allen County has been growing rapidly in the past few years. Many of the patients the clinic sees are women needing prenatal care and screening. To meet these needs, Allen County Clinic would like to open a new women's health care. Who can tell me 3 steps that Allen County needs to take to ensure that is a viable option?
Like approval from the government.
And you need to look at the population around them that might possibly be using it. The population
Look at the population around them,
and if you have a
Projected
downward,
cash flow.
projected cash flow.
people quit having babies.
See,
You're right.
You'd see if there's any competition around. Somebody may already have to market.
Let's look at this from a cost perspective.
Available capital that can/needs to be purchased.
Okay, how much capital you have on hand, and if you need to have any type of capital financing. In addition to building addition to building, in addition to the clinic, what other costs must be considered?
Your rate of return has to be looked at as well. I mean, you have to try to forecast that.
Again, let's just look at it from a cost
Equipment.
perspective.
Equipment,
You gotta, once you gotta put the equipment in there,
the staff.
and you've gotta put staff in there. So from a cost perspective, you would have to acquire the location, you'd have to equip the location, and you would have to staff the location. All right, you all tell me, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of building a new clinic?
Advantages, because you could potentially see more patients, which would increase your revenue.
Assuming you build a larger one.
Mhm.
And then the disadvantage, I guess, would be the reciprocal of that, and say that if capital's not there, the demand is not there, the cash flow is not there, one of those variables is there, then the business will suffer. So it's kind of reciprocal, what you said.
Correct. All right, now what are some of the options for funding this new addition?
Wonderful banks, I guess.
Wonderful banks,
Charities and charity organizations.
charitable organizations.
Depending on what and how you're doing it, sometimes there's government funding available
Government
for special
funding,
projects.
or what have we shown examples of and talked about already tonight? Participating in credit markets, borrowing money from the public. All right, here we're going to continue to build. When we talked about capital budgeting, we stopped at step 17. We're going to pick back up here. In step 18, I'm going to assume you read these. We're just going to put them up on the screen, though. You're going to identify and prioritize requests. Again, list capital and building needs and justify them. Put a budget committee to prioritize that list based on community need and compliance. Next thing you're going to do is project cash flows. We just said this. Going to look at replacement of new equipment, acquiring new equipment. And step 20, you must form some type of financial analysis. You want to ensure that that capital expenditure will generate enough revenue to repay anyone you borrow money from. It's going to repay that debt. It's going to tell you exactly what is your payback period. We're going to look at a payback period analysis here shortly. A discounted payback period. Net present value. The internal rate of return. We are going to look closely at payback period, net present value, and the internal rate of return. All right, so then we're going to assume that you've decided that you are going to build this new clinic and you're studying capital financing. And before you go and borrow money, what is probably something you want to ensure? Again, that you're going to be able to pay back that debt. You're going to be able to turn this into a profitable situation. What's your job? What's your employer's job? You for-profits. What's your employer's? Make money.
Maximize profits.
It's illegal to make money. Earn money.
Earn.
Well, it's earn money. That's what you must do. But your goal should be to maximize profits. All right, payback period analysis. Number of necessary cash flows to recover the original investment. Okay, if you'll flip over to page 306. All right, this is going to flow pretty smoothly. It's the least sophisticated of the three analyses because it does not take into account the time value of money. I'm only going to show you this. You're never going to use it, I hope, because of that one lesson. Everyone here realizes that $1 today does not have the same purchasing power as $1 10 years from now. Therefore, when we look at analyzing capital expenses, we must take into account that same factor. And we'll look at that with net present value. But under this payback period method, it ignores the effects of time and money. All right, so the payback period problem. Now, Surgery Center wants to buy equipment for $10,000 with projected cash flow. Okay, projected cash flow, and we're defining this as net revenues minus expenses of $3,000 per year. You're going to assume a 5-year useful life. What is the payback period? What's step one?
Step one is to determine how many years that it's going to take of consistent $3,000 payments and still have a balance due at the end.
All right, so
You'd
you're,
have 3.
what do we know?
And a half.
This is going to help you with your final when you're looking at applying that same budgeting techniques over into the company setting. What are you getting ready to spend?
$10,000.
You're going to spend $10,000. How long do you plan on using it?
5 years.
For 5 years. Now in the book, what do we have going on? We're going to define CF is not my initials. Well, it is my initials, but in this case, we're going to call it cash flows. All right. Do you see in this first year, and see how they denote this, CF0 is going to represent the initial cash outflow. This is going to represent the first payback year. What are we subtracting?
3,000.
What do you do in the second year?
Same thing.
3,000.
What do you do in the third year?
3,000.
In the fourth year? Now, how do you solve for the payback period?
You calculate how many years it's going to take.
Before recovery.
So when am I going to recover?
You'll recover during year 4, but you have to calculate up to 3 years first because you're gonna- in that-
3.33
in that
years.
4th year, you're going to have, that's when your recovery happens. So you have to get to that 9,000, in this case, that $9,000 mark.
Okay, so we know it's going to be over 1 year, correct?
Mm-hmm.
We know it's going to be over 2. At this point, I've paid back $9,000. Do I need that full 4th year?
No.
How much of that 4th year am I going to have to consume?
1,000.
Or a third.
0.33.
So you're going to need 1/3. So the payback period becomes 9.3 years. Again, it's a simple division and subtraction. But what's its disadvantage?
It's not realistic because of the value of the dollar.
The value of a dollar, it's going to ignore the effects of the time value of money.
Yes, you do.
Okay. So as we see, the payback period, the advantage of it is that it's quick and easy. The disadvantage is that it ignores the time value of money. So here it is, 10,000 cumulative cash flow, follow this category down. And we see that we're going to break even 1/3 of the way through the 4th year. Or the cash flows, let's express it in those terms. The cash flows in the 4th period. All right, now discounting.
Oh, I hate
Discounting is used to compare capital expenditures that will generate future cash flows. It is a way of looking at, what's the FV?
future value.
Future value of money, and calculating the present value of money using the following formula. Okay, the present value is equal to the future value divided by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the nth power. What do we define that in as?
Amount of years
Years.
Or
for payback period.
Just a period or something.
number of periods it's going to compound.
Mm.
Don't assume it's annual.
Yeah.
So just, I can see that being something that would throw you off.
Mhm.
Is don't always assume automatically that it's going to be the future value. Now, everyone remember the formula for future value.
Mhm.
Still alive.
All right.
Assets.
So the future value, again, we say is equal to the present value multiplied by 1 plus the interest rate. So it's a multiplication factor we're using for the future value division for the present value. All right, here's a discounting problem. What is the present value of $100,000 discounted at 5% for 5 years? Real quick, let's plug the formula in. The present value is $100,000. Divided by 1 plus the interest rate 5%. And again, we're going to compound this annually for 5 years, so it is going to compound 5 times. So we're going to raise that to the 5th power. Divide that, then you will get $78,351. Who can explain that to me?
Does it basically mean that the $100,000 loan is actually only worth $78K?
Means it's only worth $78,000. So if I was going to, you could state it this way, you could take $78,351 and invest it at 5% for 5 years, and it would amount to $100,000 at the end of that 5-year period. So $78,000, if I needed $100,000 in 5 years and I could earn 5% on it,
You have to put in at least
I would at least have to seed it with $78,351. The one thing that this assumes, what can sometimes be difficult, you want to be sure that you're locking in an accurate and compounded by an accurate interest rate. Usually if you're involving in credit markets or you're negotiating with a bank or a lender, you're going to have a fixed interest rate. Okay, again, that's the only thing I caution you to make sure that you're using. Real quick, that slide was going to show you how to enter it in on a calculator. We don't need calculators for that. If you do, this presentation is available to you up in the discussion. All right, discounted payback period. Now ABC wants to buy equipment for $10,000 with projected cash flow, $3,000 per year during the equipment's 5-year useful life. What is the discount payback period at 10%? All right, now what you should be looking at right now and thinking, what's the one thing that you're questioning right now?
Everything.
Remember, going back to this example, if you were going to spend $10,000, you said it was going to generate $3,000 a year for you in cash flow. Okay, so in year, you're going to make an initial $10,000 capital expenditure, but you're going to have incoming in that first year, $3,000 of inflows. Well, what you must do is discount that $3,000 back to its present value. This is where you are getting the discount factor.
Yeah, but why would you have a discount that first year?
Because again, it's in the future. Point zero is today. At the end of 1 year, we're assuming 12 months from now. So again, I've got to take that cash flow that I'm going to get at the end of year 1, and I've got to pull it back to its present value today.
But that's not considering like depreciation of like the equipment that you're
Let's not make this
purchasing, right?
more difficult. We're ignoring depreciation right now.
Okay.
But depreciation would have no factor on this.
This is just basically just the amount that money, is.
What we're gearing you up for right now is deciding whether or not you would ever make a capital expenditure. With a payback period, if a 3.3 years was unacceptable to your board or to you as a decision maker, you would not make that purchase. The cash flows that you would receive off of that were not sufficient. You might need a shorter payback period. Now, I'll tell you, a 3.4 year payback period is not uncommon. It is uncommon sometimes, unless you're talking very large capital expenditures, but equipment, usually anything over 10 years, you would not consider. You know, again. But in each one of these, what we're looking at, cash flow period 1, what is that? We're going to get that $3,000 at the end of the first year. What is that $3,000 worth today? What is its present value? Okay, what we're saying is it's $2,727. At the end of the second year, that $3,000 is only worth $2,478 today. So it would be silly using the payback period to assume that $3,000 that we're getting in the future is worth $3,000 today. Remember, what we're doing is we're applying that time value of money.
Mm-hmm. Where did the 1.0 under the discount factor come from?
It's just starting out.
Yeah, we're starting, and I'm getting ready to show you, I'm going to show you a quick way of where you'll find this.
Okay.
Okay, so, but right now you just look at it as being 100%.
Okay.
Because what this is telling you is that $10,000 If I pull $10,000 out of my pocket right now and decide that I'm going to buy a piece of equipment off of any one of you in this room, that $10,000 is worth $10,000 at this exact moment. So it's a multiplier of 1.
Okay.
Now, quick place to go to is if we can find, this looks like a good spot to go to.
Oh, yeah, I remember this thing. It's in our books.
Okay, so look right here. What was our factor? 10%. So across horizontally, we have the rate per period. This is your interest rate. Vertically, we are giving, that's your payback in years or your payback periods. So this is going to say in the first year, if you would discount it by 0.25%, you're going to have a multiplier of 0.9971. So let's come over here to 10%, and we see 0.909, 0.826, 0.751, 0.681.
Okay.
This is where I'm getting
Okay.
our discount factors.
So I guess we're trying to figure out how can we calculate a discount factor? And maybe I missed that in the text, but like, what is the actual formula to calculate discount factor?
We don't need to worry about it. You just
You go
get
to
it from the PV table.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's just making it more complicated. You just
No,
get it
that's
from the
fine.
PV table.
Yes,
So
and
there's
maybe
a
I
table
missed
for
that
that.
part.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So for our purposes, do you want us to use the PV table or?
Yes.
Okay.
There's your answer.
Okay.
The PV factor is defined as 1 divided by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the nth power.
That's what I was getting backwards. I was trying to put.
But I think you'll find it easier to just use that chart right
Oh,
there.
I'm sure, but.
All right, so what this is telling us, let's look at this a little deeper. The rate per period. If you were to speak as an economist, I don't ask you to be an economist, but I think I've used this term in this class. I said I hold it dear to my heart. What could we say is this interest rate that we're looking at? 10%. How might you describe that? And why would I discount it?
Repeat the question.
The 10%, how might an economist describe that?
Depreciation value? I don't know.
Question again?
Opportunity cost?
Opportunity cost. What we're saying is we can make this capital expenditure, but this is where the interest rate plays into. If I didn't make that capital expenditure, what could I do with that? So that's assuming that I would earn 10%. So that interest rate is the opportunity cost of making this expenditure. You're giving me a strange look. The only thing that's strange is that you would earn 10% right now.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think who calculates that. You know, how do I just pull that, you know, instead of just pulling 10% out of space, I'm thinking from like a practical standpoint. If I was doing this in like a business setting,
You would know, your person, your finance person is going to know what would you normally do with that money. Okay, if you did not make that expenditure, what would you do with that money? If you were going to save it, you might invest it in some type of short-term investment. Those rates are published every day for you. You know what those are. If you were going to digest that back and reinvest it into the company, How quickly are you growing cash flows? All you have to do there, compare your net income statements. You nonprofits, compare your statement of operations. You know, how quickly are you growing your assets? You're going to acquire another asset. So it's not a number that you just pull out. It's a number that you would compare. What would I do with this money? Again, opportunity cost. What would I do with this money if I did not make that capital expenditure?
Okay, that makes sense.
All right, let's get back here. Let's build on our next factor. Here we go. Net present value. Now, the net present value is going to rely on those discounted cash flows. It's going to provide an answer in real dollars. And an NPV, a net present value of 0, means the capital expenditure is generating discounted cash flows just sufficient to cover the original investment. A very loose fitting rule is that if the net present value, assuming all other operations are good and the organization has sufficient cash flow and sufficient reserves, and you're meeting those ratios, and you ran an analysis over a capital expenditure and you came up with a positive net present value, your vote would be to make the purchase. That means that if I take a look at all of the future cash flows that I expect to get from this, they are going to be more than sufficient to cover that initial investment. A net present value in the negative is going to assume you do not pay back. Before we get into that, I'm going to pull, I made up a problem.
Yeah.
Oh, Crash Airlines.
Last night, if you had me in accounting, I got to draw an airplane up and I made up a problem called Crash Airlines, and I used that to illustrate something. I did a problem
You can crash
today.
hot air balloons.
Mhm.
If I can find
Or
it.
helium.
A JetBlue.
Oh, my.
JetBlue.
All right. What can we call this? What can we call this? We're going to calculate. All right, and let's just go ahead and use Crash Airlines. So we're going to be calculating net present value. And over here, this is where it gets fun. Whoosh.
I can tell that you got your master's in art.
All right, so here we have Crash Airlines.
That's cool where you draw the turtles.
Yeah, probably not the best airplane that you can see, but you know, remember, I don't get paid to give drawing lessons. All right, so you're the CFO for Crash Airlines, and you are trying to decide on whether or not you want to, your board's charged you with deciding whether or not the corporation should make a capital expenditure for Oh, we're gonna make the seat aisles right in between these two windows a little bit bigger. We're gonna accommodate the frequent traveler. All right, so we're going to keep this round and small, we're gonna assume that's a cost of $10,000. And we are going to use a period. So we're gonna let this represent time. And we are going to let this span a period of, let's call this 0, five years. And I don't leave 5 and not 0 over here twice. So we're going to look at it from a period of 5 years. What do I need? What else must I consider?
Interest rate.
The interest rate. And how did I define that interest rate? Using economic terms. It is the opportunity cost. What else could I do with this money? So we're going to assume $10,000. Let's do it right here. And we're going to assume, let's keep it realistic, 6% interest rate. How would I define this initial period? What's happening in cash flow period 0?
That's the $10,000. And the value would be 1.0.
We are going to assume $10,000 we just spent. Now, I'm going to give you some numbers here. You projected in the first year, this is going to bring in positive cash flows of $2,500 in year 1, $4,000 in year 2, $5,000 in year 5, or excuse me, $5,000 in year 3, $3,000 in year 4. Let's assume we're burning it up here now, so it's only going to net us positive $1,000 in year 5. And what did we say the formula was for the present value?
Future value divided by 1 plus the interest rate raised to the nth power.
One plus the interest rate. Get that up there. Square this up. Everybody knows, yep, my airplane is off, but the present value we'll say is equal to the future value divided by 1 plus the interest rate. All right, so what this problem is going to set us up in what we must calculate is we must again take these future expected cash, positive cash inflows. We must assign and solve for the present value of each one of these.
Plug it in.
All right, so in year 1, initially, what do I have?
10,000.
Minus $10,000. Don't lose track of the minus sign. What am I expecting at the end of the first period? Positive cash flows. So positive cash flows of 2,500. That is the future value.
Mhm.
What's the interest rate?
6%.
What must I add to this?
And the years?
Well, there was only 1 year at that point,
Only 1 year at that point, so
so that's literally, yeah, 1.06.
is there more that I'm expecting?
In the next years,
In the next year, 4,000.
$5,000 plus 5,000 over to the third plus 3,000 plus 1,000.
So what I've done here is I've taken the future cash flow, I'm discounting it by my interest rate. But remember, at this period, I've got to discount it for 2 years, because that 6% I could have earned for 2 years. In year 3, that 5,000, I've got to discount it back for 3 periods.
4, 5.
Okay, I can go ahead and solve that. My total outflows are going to be minus $10,000. If I make that capital expenditure, what can I expect to earn in return?
You want each individual number as we go along?
No,
No, you just want the total
just sum
amount?
it for me.
Just sum it?
What's the sum of my inflows? What's the sum of my future inflows at their present value? And just think of that term, net present value. The net representing the sum. I'm going to speed it up. Make sure you match this number. So the sum of the present value of all my future cash flows sums to $13,329. So what does net present value equal?
3239.
$3,239. Are you going to vote to accept the decision to expand my airline seats?
Yeah, because
Yes.
it's
Again.
positive.
Assuming that all other analysis is proving sufficient. And what obviously you would want to assume is that you had sufficient cash flows or reserves on hand that you could meet normal obligations for 5 years. You'd make sure that you had capital reserves that could meet any strategic plans that you've made during that 5 years. Assuming that's a goal and assuming you've got positive cash on hand, you would vote to accept this decision. By spending $10,000 today, I can expect
You gotta use.
to return $13,239. And again, when all other ratios have been satisfied, whenever net present value is positive,
Okay.
you vote to accept. Any questions?
I'm still just trying to do the basics.
All right.
I just can't get these two. Because usually what you use e to the x does not let me. Oh, there we go.
Okay. Make sure you refer to this video because you're not going to find that in the presentation. I added that for tonight's class. So make sure you'll only find that on the video. I like to say that you could calculate right off of that your internal rate of return of being able to divide that by your initial outflow. You're going to find that in practice, one of these two methods are being used. It's highly doubtful, again, that your organizations use the normal payback period. I think more people probably rely on net present value, but they're going to rely on net present value or the internal rate of return. You know, you solve that internal rate of return, and again, assuming that you make sure that that rate was sufficient. These are your calculator functions. Okay. Step 21 in capital budgeting. Identify non-financial benefits. You know, before we go here, let me show you something. Inside Microsoft Excel,
Greatest thing ever.
if you go to formulas and you go to financial, you're going to see the formula for future value, net present value, internal rate of return, present value. Again, if I calculate that, you're going to need to know where to plug in your data.
What's the NPER?
I'm not going to tell you that.
Well,
I spent the time by showing you how to do it on the board. I'll show you where the shortcut is, but I'm not going to hold your hand down the yellow brick road. The good thing, if you understand Excel, if you rub it over, it tells you what everything is.
Yeah.
Remember, if you use Excel, make sure you include the data up in this little bar. All right. Who can give me a non-financial benefit?
If you make your physicians happy?
If you make your physicians happy. Is that important?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. If you make your community happy. If you satisfy community need. Okay, medical staff politics, that's what that's going to assume, that you're making your medical staff, you're satisfying or going above their need, and you're satisfying community. Step 22, evaluate benefits and make decisions. Why might I need access to capital? Let's recap.
In order to expand.
expand and grow. Rising demand from aging facilities, a need for expansion. Does technology change in your workplace?
Yep, all day, every day.
Wish, I really wish. In 2010, it's reported 44% of hospitals have reduced access to capital, and 67% had not started approved capital projects but had put them on hold. So you asked the question if you're keeping up. Credit worthiness. Again, we'll talk about these bonds that are issued. I've walked through a bond payment in prior classes. Who assigns these ratings? Here are your three major credit bureaus. S&P, Moody, and Fitch. S&P and Moody going to be the two largest. They are going to come in and analyze your position, your strength, and your ability to pay back any debt. They're going to look at what type of management and government structure you currently have in place. What type of operating performance have you demonstrated? Do you have strong and liquid investment products or portfolios? Do you have liquid cash on hand? Are you in a favorable market demographic? Has there been any favorable changes in your organizational or legal structure? With capital expenditures, you might think about the lease versus purchase decisions. All right, generally, we'll look at leases first. We have two types of leases. We have operating leases and capital leases. Operating leases are for periods that are less than the equipment's useful life. Capital leases are for periods up to the useful life, and including any provisions for purchase at the end. Has anyone in here ever leased an automobile?
Nope.
Yeah. Okay. You're going to find these terms being very similar. What are some advantages of leasing?
Don't worry about the maintenance.
Well, typically.
Lower upfront payments.
Lower upfront payments.
Always have the best technology.
Always have the best technology because it's going to be continually upgraded. Flexibility. There's where you're going to get your upgrades. Protection against technological changes. Something changes, you're going to be holding it for a shorter period. If you're leasing it from someone, the lessor is going to be the one that assumes it at the end of the lease. Therefore, they're going to probably provide you with some type of maintenance because they want to ensure that it's in good working order. You for-profits, you get tax advantages. How do you think you get a tax advantage?
I don't know, but that explains why.
On your tax return, you will treat this as an expense. So when you look at your income statement and you're taking revenue minus expenses, you treat this as an expense. Now, issuing capital, yes, that interest payment would be an expense as well, but it's a lot cleaner, I'm going to say, than just making a lease payment. What's some disadvantages?
You don't own it.
You don't own it, you can owe more.
Typically, you're going to spend more on the lease. Remember that third party, the lessor. Lessor, when you return it, that individual or that entity, they're going to have to earn a profit on it. So again, they're probably going to mark it up. You're going to end up paying a little bit more. You might have penalties for early determination. Look at problem 13.4. Here it says we can borrow $1.3 million at 10% on a declining balance. We're gonna depreciate it straight line over 5 years. We get a trade-in value of $130,000 at the end of the useful life, and we're gonna spend $12,000 a year on maintenance. If we lease it, we're gonna spend $26,000 per month for 60 months, and that includes maintenance. Okay, let's look right here. If we purchase it, who can tell me where we're getting the $260,000?
Is that the straight line depreciation?
Straight line depreciation, 1.3 million divided by 5 years. So I'm gonna pay $260,000 in year 1. What's the interest rate?
10%.
10%. 260,000 times 10% is 130,000. And I've got to add in the $12,000 maintenance expense. My total expense at the end of year 1 is going to be $402,000. Now, is that $402,000 in the future worth $402,000 today? No. So what am I doing over here?
You're discounting it.
I'm discounting it to the present value, assigning a factor of 10%. Either solving from the formula or referring to the present value table, we see that the PV factor is 0.909 in the first year at 10%. So the present value of that first year's expense is $365,418. I do that for years 2 through 5 and factor in the trade-in of $130,000. I see that my total present value of this capital expense is $1,264,464. Now, if I lease it, same thing. We were told we could lease it for 5 years. Yeah, 60 months. So annual payments are going to be $312,000. I have no maintenance cost here, and I have no interest cost. Okay, so the only thing I'm doing here is discounting the present value of the lease payment. And I see that it's $1,182,000. What are you going to do?
Lease it.
You're gonna lease it because you're saving $81,984.
Because the PV expense of the lease is less than the PV expense of the purchase, you as the CFO are going to vote in favor of leasing. Quick ratios here that are used: debt to capitalization ratio. We're going to divide long-term debt by long-term debt and net debt. Your capital expense ratio. Okay. You're going to take your interest expense, add it to your depreciation expense, divide that by total expense times 100. If you've not instituted any capital expenditures in your organization, I bet someone there is paying attention to the average age of a plant ratio. Okay, accumulated depreciation divided by depreciation expense. All right, closing points. Why are capital costs important?
Rising healthcare costs.
Rising healthcare costs, dictating the trends of acquisitions, mergers. This is a hotbed for M&A activity in today's environment, in your healthcare field. I would say you probably having one of the larger, our investment bankers right now, not ours, but your Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley of the world is reporting a decline in M&A activity in the corporate world. But I think you're starting to see a lot of it pick up ever since the Affordable Care Act. We've seen more and more of this occurring. We say capital expenditures involve purchase of land, building, and equipment. Stress the fact, used for operations. And those are the last of the points.
Put on the phone.
Any questions?
I have a question after the video about that.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll look at financial analysis and management reporting.